Hey, hey.
G'day everyone.
It's Thursday.
Yep.
And we're back at it for some more question time.
Yep.
So we've got 3 questions today. Three different questions.
Yes,
as
they
well.
are. Yeah, yeah.
So nice and interesting. They've all come at different points, different parts of the Bible, different thoughts. And
Different people.
Yeah, so it's really great. So we'll get stuck into it.
Yep.
Jumping into the Old Testament
Right.
first with Andrew and his Bible reading stream. So he's taking us back to Leviticus 24. So there's a law that says anyone who takes the life of a human being is to be put to death. But his question is about, well, if someone needs to be put to death, what is the difference between them putting them to death? Like, isn't that kind of like, well, then you just have to kill the person that put that person to death, and then it just creates this cycle of you.
In the Bible, as in, by the way, in normal life, there's a distinction between lawful and unlawful taking of life. And so think about common law in Australia and other places in the world. There's a difference between deliberate murder and manslaughter. There's a difference between murder and manslaughter and killing in self-defence. One is seen as bringing culpability and punishment. The other, self-defence, is seen as you're set free, or that's seen as okay. And so it's worth realising that even in Australian law, even with a country without the death penalty, we have a distinction between lawful and unlawful taking of life. And so a policeman can take someone's life, and it's not always seen as an unlawful thing. And that's also true of war. War is a place where taking of life is lawful, and that's seen in international law between all countries. It's lawful to take the life of enemy combatants, but it's unlawful to take the life of innocent bystanders. And so we have distinctions between lawful and unlawful taking of life. And what the law is talking about here in Israel are the foundations for all those modern conceptions. So all these things, all these distinctions we have in modern law, all these kind of stuff about the difference between war and peace, the difference between police and normal citizens, the difference between self-defence and murder, those actually come from the foundations laid down in these books of the Bible. Our common law, our legal system, has many of its foundations, matter of fact, the vast majority of its foundations, from the Bible's view of things. And in the Bible here, you see a clear distinction between unlawful and lawful taking of life. And so I think that's what's going on here.
Yeah.
So Andrew, there are lawful ways to take life. And here you see it as a consequence of murder. There are other crimes for which it's lawful to take someone's life. And here murder is one of them. So there's a difference between murder and legal killing. I think is the simplest way to say it.
And do you think, in regards to one of the differences, it is God's justice? So with war and with this lawful act of murdering someone, well, it's not murdering, it's their justice. Like, it's their punishment, basically.
And so they may be seen as non-preferable but just things. Yeah. And so you've seen in most Western countries, they've moved away from using the death penalty, for instance. And they've done that because of issues of muddled justice, that they want to be careful. And this is another principle, by the way, from the Old Testament, from the book of Genesis, where Abraham argues for the city of Sodom and says, if there's only this many righteous people, if there's only one righteous person, and that same principle is used with this. If we use the death penalty and yet there's one innocent person who loses their life because of that, shouldn't we just ditch the death penalty? And so many Western countries have decided to do that. Australia has, England has, and other Western nations. America is somewhere in the middle. In the American Constitution, part of their law is that nobody shall be deprived of life or liberty unless for just purposes. So they have the provision for the death penalty in their constitution. And so they're in the middle of having discussions about that or not. But so there is just taking of life, and there in a sense always has been, and it's just recognised differently in different societies.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, thank you for that question, Andrew.
Yep.
Okay, we'll move on to Stanley's question, which has come out of the talk on Tuesday night and the passage, that practicality of doing good.
Yes.
So Stanley's asked about, the fact that doing good works is a way for us to display our faith.
Yep.
What about the times that we don't really feel, we don't really want to do these good works, but we still do them?
We're not feeling it.
Yeah, we're not feeling it, we do it anyway. Does it still show our faith?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, Stanley. It raises up a whole lot of different issues for me. because I'm often a reluctant do-gooder. And I find myself having those attitudes, particularly with people I don't particularly like or identify with or I'm not friends with. I don't really feel it. Why should I do good to them? And so I think the Bible here creates a couple of distinctions. There's a distinction between how you feel about someone or something and what's the right thing to do. So let me put the bit on the other foot, Stanley, and say, would it be okay to do an evil thing as long as we felt it? Do you know what I mean? If it felt right or felt good, would that be okay to do it? And we know the answer to that's no. And I think the obverse is true. Just because we don't feel like doing it or we're not feeling it, it still is the right thing to do and therefore a display of faith. Matter of fact, sometimes it can be a greater display of faith that we do the thing we really don't want to do, but it's the loving and kind thing to do.
Yeah.
It's, by the way, difference between love and emotions here in the Bible. Love is a self-sacrificial commitment to the good of the other, no matter how you feel about it, right? It's not about a feeling of love. And so you can love people that you don't like. As a matter of fact, the Bible calls us to do that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. And so I think the answer, basically speaking, is yes, they are still a display of your faith. I think there's a bit of a however, though. I do want to say, I think over time, the Bible, God would like us, He would like our feelings to be schooled, our affections to be schooled, to match what we believe about Him. That's true, but we need to recognise that in our sinful hearts, in our normal lives, we're going to struggle with that. That's not, we shouldn't be expecting that of ourselves, that we'll always feel it. And that it's not feeling it that makes it right in this sense. It's what we do that makes it right. It's what we do that shows our faith. And so it definitely is a display of faith. And,
is it that tension between, as well, this is brought up in the Bible, the fact that God wants the heart. He wants the sacrifice of the heart, not just the sacrifice itself. And so you don't want to fall into a trap where you're just doing it because you're like, I need to do this, I have to do this. It's an obligation. And so you're doing your obligation begrudgingly. Whereas He's like, well, no, I see that you don't want to do it, but yet your heart in you is still pushing you. As you said, like, what's the motive behind you still pushing to do it when you're still begrudging about it?
So
but it's that hard.
Yeah, it's so hard. There's that mixture between feelings and emotions, desires and will, intentions and purposes, and actions themselves, the actual action itself. And that's actually a muddled mess a little bit for us. Because we're struggling within ourselves. And so I think you're right. God does desire us to do these things out of a good motive and a good heart, but we've got to recognise that in itself is a process of growing as a Christian. And sometimes we do things and we're not feeling it, and that's okay because it's the right thing to do. And we just need to recognise that. But you're right, we don't want to get to a point where all we're doing is this kind of soulless devotion to duty. That's not the picture the Bible gives, because God wants our hearts and our desires and our passions to match His love for the world and His view of our lives. And so the hope is over time our affections get schooled, if you like. They grow up and they mature. But don't be afraid of doing the right thing even when you don't feel it, because sometimes it's actually the practice of doing the right thing that can actually start to school your affections and change the way you feel. As well. I'm thinking here as well of of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's looking ahead at the cross. Now, he wants to go to the cross, okay? That's in terms of purpose and intention. He's willingly doing it. He understands this is the plan of the Father since before the creation of the world, and yet he's in that garden. He is sweating and weeping and praying, Father, take this cup from me, because he sees how difficult it's going to be, and he doesn't, in a sense, want that. There's a part of him that doesn't want that, and yet he says, not my will, but your will be done, and he goes away and does it. And so that's just worth noticing as well.
That's a perfect example to go to, because it's Jesus. He is our example, but also it breaks that taboo that we do always need to be a happy, sharing person who does all the things that we want to do, because it's like, we know that I definitely know that I can't. So many times I grumble in myself.
Well, you see that in Jesus, because he's angry at the world and its evil and its sin in the Gospels. He's angry at them, and yet he's going to go and die for them. And so that complexity of those things, of those different, I guess, feelings in a way,
which I think leads us perfectly to actually discuss this next question. Because Eve is asking, well, why would Jesus do this then? Why would he? He sees the wickedness, the evilness of the world and of people and of creation. And he chooses, even though despite the unwillingness in a sense, to willingly die for people.
Yeah,
so why? Why would we do that?
I think, Evie, this is a really, really good question. And I think in some ways it gets to the heart of us as people, because we look at the world around us, we look at ourselves in our own hearts if we're honest, and we think, why would God do that? Not just why would God die for this society of Australia, this world that's filled with so much evil, but why would God die for me, who is part of this world, who is so evil and sinful? It's a really, really good question, and in a sense there are a gazillion answers, and we need to kind of just read through the whole Bible to answer it. There's one place though I want to go to just to expose a little bit of how the Father is feeling, and it's a story that Jesus tells. It's a parable that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 15, the parable of the prodigal son. And in this story, as we read it, I'm just as I skim. Jesus is answering your question, because at the start of the chapter, in verse 2, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." They're asking exactly this question, Evie. They're going, Jesus is actually welcoming evil people. And that's a really good question, because they know that God hates evil. Their religion, they really know that. They've read their Bible. So how can this be God, and how can this be the representative of God? And he is accepting and welcoming in evil people. Everyone knows these people. I mean, tax collectors are terrible people. They are horrific people. The worst of the worst. It's like a combination of a pedophile and a drug dealer, okay? And a human trafficker, all in one. They were just despised and hated. They were evil people, and Jesus welcomes them. What's he doing? And so he tells a few stories, and one of the stories he tells, the big story he tells, is the story of the prodigal son. And it's a story about a father and his two sons. And one of his sons comes up to his father, and if I phrase it for the 21st century, he says, "Hey, Dad, let's just imagine for a moment that you're dead. Can you please give me my inheritance now? So I wish you were dead so that I could have the money that's coming to me when you die." Now that in itself is pretty horrific, and in that culture it's even worse. And yet what does the father do? He actually gives the son what he asks for. And that's a picture of our humanity. God gives us good things even though we've turned our back on him. We've said to God, we want you to be dead. We want you to be out of our life.
But we want all the stuff that you can give us.
But we want everything you can give us. And that's what God does. God gives us sun and rain. He does not turn his back on us. He lets us go into the world and do what we want to do. And what do we do with that? We do what the prodigal son does. He wastes that money in profligacy and ends up destitute. Well, that's what we do with our world, isn't it? We do evil things to one another. We do evil things to the world, and our world ends up a mess. A mess of sin and evil and problems we can't solve and accusations we're throwing against each other. Our world is a mess. And yet, what is the attitude of the father in this story? Now, it doesn't contain his sacrifice, so I want to get to that in a moment, but I want to look here at the attitude of the father, because this son's basically said, "I wish you were dead," and the father's given him what he wants, and the son's gone away. And yet, when the son comes to his senses and says, "I want to return to the father," what's the father's attitude? Well, you look at this guy, and it's almost as if he's been sitting every day, and as he's working the fields, he's had an eye to the road, because he is waiting for his son to come back. He longs to see his son. And when his son comes back, he doesn't kind of go, "What do you want? Get down your hands and knees and beg, and maybe I'll forgive you." No, he runs to his son and wraps his arms around this stinking, revolting mess that his son's become, and welcomes him home and has a party. Because that's his heart, that's his motive. He loves his children. And I think that's a picture of what would motivate God to send Jesus to die for people. Because this story is told as Jesus marches towards his death.
Yeah.
He's telling this story to explain why he's going to the cross. He's going to the cross because his Father loves what he's made. And we can't wrap our heads around that, because for us, if someone betrayed us that way, if someone acted in that way, we would hate them back, and we would hate them back with a passion, and we would never speak to them again. And you see this time and time and time again as we destroy human relationships. And we'll do it for the slightest pretext. If someone snubs us on Facebook, they're out. You know, we find this so hard to connect to, and yet this is the heart of God. That He loves the people that He made so much, that even in their awfulness and evilness, He comes to rescue them. It's just incredible.
I think a really good passage that sums it up is 1 John.
Yep.
Like, it just perfectly goes to it in talking about God is love, and this is how God showed His love. He sent His one and only Son into the world that we might live through Him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Like, it's just, it's all about Him and what He's done.
Yeah.
And it is nothing on ours, and it's just, we can only understand it because Jesus died.
Yeah, and that is an incredible thing, isn't it? That's the nature of the love of God, and that's what He's aiming for us. Love one another as I have loved you, Jesus said. And that's what He's talking about, and that reorients the way we think. And we want to train our lives to do that, to actually love people that way, and then train our affections to follow the way we act. And really, really good question.
And it's hard to understand sometimes, and so it's you know, Evie kind of, before she asked this question, was like, don't judge me, I'm still doing all of this, but it's like, Evie, we are all still asking this question because it's so hard for us to actually capture it, because we can't, like, we don't express love that way because we are sinful and God is perfect, and so we are constantly going to doubt, we are constantly going to question it, because it's just so unthinkable sometimes to us.
And that's really worth saying. I think in a sense, we are all infants when it comes to the love of God. We're all new at this. It doesn't matter if you've been a Christian for 2 weeks or 20 years. I think I turned 32 this year as a Christian.
That's so amazing.
Okay, I've been a Christian for 32 years. I'm still new to the love of God, because it is so profound and so big and so alien in a sense. And so we are constantly schooling ourselves with this. So be encouraged, be of good heart. And I think, I'm thinking here, if you're watching this and you're not a Christian, what do you gain from this? And I really, in some ways, don't know, but I think this is one of the distinctives of the Christian faith. I read a book once that talked about the rise of Christianity, and how did Christianity go from nothing to being the kind of the official sanctioned faith of the Roman Empire within 3 centuries. I mean, the Roman Empire already had a faith that it was quite happy with. So how did that happen within 3 centuries? And this historian and author, he says, look, there's lots of different reasons, but the one basic reason is Christians believed in a God who loved other people, who loved His enemies, and who had mercy on them. And He called His people to be the same as Him. And that is transformative. And I think that is, in some ways, the heart of what Christianity gives to the world. That the world is based on grace and mercy from God, and how we see that work out in the way Christians treat other people. And so I hope, I think in many ways Christians have been in the news for lots of bad reasons in the last few decades. I hope that in the coming decades that Christians can be in the news for better reasons. Can't predict the news, but
we're all in this together, we're all learning together. Your questions actually help us to stop and think through these things as well. So we enjoy it, we hope you guys enjoy it, no matter where you're at in your faith as well, and that you are growing in your knowledge and in your understanding of who God is and who Jesus is. So we'll leave you there for the rest of your Thursday, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
See you there.